we better get started. So I guess not everybody will have seen the previous talk, Bryony, so they won't know quite how you come to be here. Maybe you don't know how you come to be here, right? So you're director of the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge, which I'm sure, going to tell us what it will do. So let's think a little bit. How did you actually come to be director? When were you appointed? And then let's go back a little bit before that. So when...
Well, I started this role in July 2019. How I came to be appointed is perhaps anyone's guess, you might say, but it was based on having had a few years' experience of working in this area in industry, and yeah, it just felt like a good
work in industry.
Hmm?
Which industry? Where did you?
I worked in Costain, and then before that in Doosan in Scotland.
That's pretty good. And that CCS, I mean, do you think that was a very different CCS, or?
In terms of the landscape?
Yeah, I mean, did it feel different, CCS, then?
Well, yes, of course it did. There wasn't really much happening, and you know, you're always feeling like a pioneer at that time, aren't you? Whereas now just about everybody's doing it, aren't they? Which is great.
And I guess it was coal then, wasn't it?
Yes, of course, yes.
Yeah, no, nothing else. Whereas I don't think there's been any talk about coal CCS on that new mine in Cumbria, for example. CCS hasn't come up in connection with that, not that I've noticed.
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
No. And then what do you think was the most useful thing that you learned in your time in industry for managing the IDC?
Ah.
Needn't be technical.
I think technical, I wouldn't really like to pick anything out. I think what it has given me is quite a lot of sympathy with our industrial partners as they go through these competitive processes, and knowing how difficult it is to get the commitment of a whole organisation to bid into a competition like this. Yes. I think if I hadn't gone through it myself, I wouldn't be quite so sympathetic to the plight people find themselves in. But as it works out, you know, I'm really super impressed by the commitment that all of our supporting partners have really shown to getting these projects underway.
Yes. Well, I'm sure we'll hear more about those. And I mean, just so formal question: what actually was your degree background? And going back further, what do you sort of see yourself as?
I'm a metallurgist originally, and still see myself as one, really. So it's kind of, I think it gives you quite a general interest in a lot of things. And so I started out in the nuclear industry, looking at you know, how nuclear components survive in the long term, and failure mechanisms and so on. And so I'm quite accustomed to long time scales in the projects I work on, so reasonably comfortable with CCS from that point of view.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thanks very much for coming to talk to us, and I know you've got a lot more to tell us than you had a year ago, so we're all looking forward to it, or even a few months ago. So we're all looking forward to it. So over to you, Bryony.
Brilliant. Thanks so much.
No, thank you.
So, well, as John said, you know, I've spoken at this webinar series a couple of times before, and I'm really glad to have the chance to come back again. So much happened since I was able to speak last time, which was around about October last year. We've launched a lot of projects, got a lot of clarity about what the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge consists of. And my only problem for today is I can't really say ever so much about the projects, not because I can't, but because Caris has kindly invited all the projects to speak in this webinar series, and it'd be really very unfair on them to really tell you loads of details about what they're doing. So I'm just going to give you an overview, a kind of taster of what's to come, and then you'll hear much more detail from the projects themselves over the next month or two. So what we are doing in the Industrial Decarbonisation Challenge is accelerating the decarbonisation of industry in a cost-effective way, with the idea that we will boost the competitiveness of our key industrial regions and drive clean growth at the same time. It's not easy to do, but the regions we are talking about here are called industrial clusters, and they're the blue blobs on the map, each one vying to have the highest amount of emissions in the UK, but Humber just ahead of South Wales on that basis at the moment. These industrial clusters have a number of features, but the most important one is they have lots of industries in a fairly compact space and are in coastal locations, so that carbon capture and storage is a feasible approach to decarbonising some of those industries. So what we're trying to do is really transform how we operate in the UK, not just incremental little bits of things. This is all about decarbonising at scale. There's no pilot testing. It's all for real and all at full scale. And we will be looking at making sure that the UK remains attractive for investment, and that we develop the infrastructure that will support implementation of low carbon technologies in the longer term. So I guess this slide is slightly different from the one I've shown before, in that we've ended up getting more money to spend on the challenge, and I'll explain how that came about a little bit later on. But we've got around £200 million of public funding, and that is more than matched by the investment by industry into the programme. So it's approaching £500 million of work underway. And we divide the programme into 3 key areas. The first one, although it's the smallest, is not at all the least important. I mean, this area we call cluster plans is about how each of these cluster regions will achieve net zero over the timescale 2030, 2040, 2050. So these are not projects that will result in direct construction of something, but they're around what's needed in the region. How do we get people engaged in driving decarbonisation forward? What skills do we need? What supply chains in place? What new technologies are coming along that might make a big difference in the longer term, and how much might it all cost? So those plans are really important for providing information in what needs to happen in the future. But then the deployment projects are all about what are we going to do actually now with what we already know. So this is about what essential infrastructure do we need in the UK around CCS and hydrogen production. And these projects are basically to design that essential infrastructure. They're all very big projects, but we don't have enough money to actually construct things. That's going to cost in the billions and require further investment a bit later on. But these projects are obviously of critical importance for the UK. And then we have our research activity, which is a further £20 million of work. It's intended as a nationwide research programme, which will support the decarbonisation of our industrial clusters and work very closely with the cluster regions to identify what their needs are and meet some of those needs. And the research centre should be launching quite soon. We don't have a firm date yet. This is just a little map of where our projects are in the UK, so matching pretty closely with the blobs on the map that I showed before. So we've got projects in South Wales, Scotland, the North West Teesside and Humberside, which have all got a cluster plan project each and a deployment project each. And then we have a project which is of a little bit different nature in the Black Country region, which is around decarbonising industry in the West Midlands, which has got a completely different set of challenges from those in coastal regions. We've had fantastic support from industry. This is a slide we put together for the early stages of the competition, where we were running some smaller projects to help industry to understand the nature of the opportunity and what they might be able to bid for in the larger competition. And we haven't produced a new slide of partner organisations for the main programme because we couldn't fit them all on the slide, but these are the initial organisations involved. And you can see the UK's major oil and gas organisations featuring prominently. Of course, we've got National Grid, many power producers, of course, including Drax, SSE, and some of our big construction companies. We have consultancies and many other organisations shown on here. And we are tremendously grateful for the support they have shown for the programme, as without them we wouldn't be going anywhere. So what I'm going to do now is take you through the projects which have been funded. And it is quite amazing to think that since I last talked, we've launched all of our main cluster plan projects and all of the deployment projects as well. So I'll take you through the cluster plan projects first. So just a reminder, these are projects which are looking at how to decarbonise a region. And the idea is that they will look at what industries are in their region, the difficulty of decarbonising those, what is the state of skills in the region, what is the existing infrastructure and is it suitable. They'll look at supply chains, they'll look at costs and timing of various decarbonisation activities they might get underway, and crucially they'll look at planning and then the need to really get the local and public bodies who need to be involved all up to speed with what this opportunity is all about. So each project has a number of points of commonality, but each of them also has points of difference reflecting their local community. And they have different sorts of project partners in the regions, and you can look on the website to get detail of exactly which organisations are involved. I've just listed here the titles of the 6 projects and the name of the lead organisation. So in Scotland, it's this organisation called Nexus, and in the Black Country, we have something called the Black Country Consortium Limited, which has significant involvement from academia and local bodies. In South Wales, we have, I think, our biggest number of participants. I'm not so sure if there's 30 of them, but anyway, lots and lots of participants in the South Wales Cluster Plan project, and in which is led by a consulting company called CR+. And in Net Zero, then in Net Zero Tees Valley, then we have Tees Valley Combined Authority leading that. And of course, you'll have seen over the years them playing an important role in the development of CCS projects in the UK. And in the Northwest, we have the involvement of Peel Environmental. And in Humber, then that project is being led by Hull City Council. So it's lots and lots of different organisations coming together. They're going to be producing sort of mapping for their regions, trying to model what the future might look like based on what they know now. It should be a really exciting piece of work. And then what we will do partway through this period between now, when the projects are launching, and March 2023, when they come to an end, is we're also going to do some work to pull all of these plans together into a UK-wide plan, and then feed that information back into the projects, so to help them with the details of what they're doing. So these projects are all underway. They all kicked off in January this year, as we had hoped, and they should finish in about 2 years from now. Just as an example, I picked out Scotland and South Wales. So in Scotland, most of these cluster plans have a complicated map of what's going to go on in the region, and you can have a look at that later. But the idea, obviously, in Scotland is to enable large-scale emissions reduction. They have identified which are the top emitting sectors, and of course, we'll recognise that the St Fergus gas terminal area results in significant opportunities for CO2 reduction. And in Scotland, there are lots of industries spread around Scotland needing to potentially be connected together by pipeline or ship. So it is quite a complicated picture, and it should be interesting to see what they come up with. And then in South Wales, we have perhaps the biggest cluster region, many different industries operating in this region, and lots of large organisations that need to decarbonise. So refineries, we have a lot of steel production there, and so on. You might have seen on the BBC News this morning that the South Wales cluster plan had their press announcement today, and were featured quite heavily on the BBC Wales News. And so there's a lot of interesting information available on what their plans are if you wanted to have a look at that separately. So moving on, I'm going to start talking about these deployment projects now. So this is the 172 million. I just thought I'd talk you through the selection process we've gone through, so that it doesn't all look kind of random, how we ended up with these projects, which certainly isn't random at all. And so the process was a fairly standard one, I suppose. What we started out with was the initial cluster focused work to identify what the deployment project proposals would look like. So that work was all done in some small projects that we called stage 1 projects. And then those projects bid into the stage 2 competition. So if you hadn't been successful at stage 1, you couldn't bid into the stage 2 competition. And all of those projects did bid into stage 2. And then once they had submitted their proposals, we had to find a way of selecting the projects that would get funded, given that we didn't have enough money for them all. So we designed a quite complicated but robust process for doing this. So we went through the proposal submission stage, and then we went through a standard process that Innovate UK adopts for all of its proposals, which is basically having some independent assessors. Usually 5 people would look at each proposal and score them all. And then for the proposals would get through that process, and normally that would result in a funding decision. But in the case of this massive competition, and given that these projects are not just projects in their own right, they are intended to provide the foundation for decarbonising these major industrial regions of the UK. So it's really important that we get the right projects. So we didn't really want to make that decision on the basis of who'd written the best proposal. We wanted it to be on the basis of real expert delving into these projects to understand what they would really contribute to the UK. So we added in an additional stage, which was around an in-depth interview and presentation. with a panel of real experts in this area who quizzed the projects on what exactly were they delivering, when was it going to be delivered, how much would it cost. They talked about knowledge sharing approaches and how we would be sure that knowledge would be shared amongst these projects in a meaningful way. Recognizing that knowledge sharing is seen to be one of the key ways in which we'll ultimately reduce the costs of decarbonisation. Really important that these projects do share knowledge. And so all of those sort of difficult questions were assessed, and out of that came a recommendation for the projects to be funded, and it was a really very, very a good process in which I felt a lot of confidence. And out of that also came the idea that actually we got really so many great projects in the portfolio that more money was going to be sought by BEIS to see if we could fund more projects, and that is ultimately what happened. So we've been able to fund each of the industrial cluster regions projects, which has been a really fantastic outcome. So all of these projects have started in March, which is amazing. That is exactly on time. They were announced in January, and they've started on time in March, and they will last for either 2 years or 3 years, depending on their choice. So here they are. So I've just written out on this slide who the project partners are, just so you can see. You can find much more information on this from the press releases that came out in March. But starting over on the left-hand side of the page, what you can see is that in many regions, we've got projects that are called onshore and offshore, which might seem a bit confusing, given that obviously there's not much point having an onshore project if it can't connect to offshore storage. But the reason why we did this is that in the process of developing the deployment competition scope, it became clear that it was going to be difficult to treat the projects fairly from an assessment point of view, because they've got different sorts of elements of work in them. So particularly when Teesside and Humberside decided they were going to jointly develop a store to share, then what that meant is that they weren't really able to submit comparable bids. And then we also have the situation in South Wales where they don't have a store. And so we didn't really want the projects to be assessed on an unfair basis. So we kind of split the offshore and the onshore proposals from each other, with the idea that they would come back together and be managed as a single entity if both elements of the project were deemed suitable for funding. And of course, at the proposal stage, we didn't know if they would be deemed suitable for funding or not. But now we will sort of be putting these projects, back together so that they can be thought about as a whole. So starting off on the left-hand side, we've got the HyNet offshore project, which is around the CCS activity in Liverpool Bay, which is led by Eni, and they are very much focused on how to get the best value out of their assets in Liverpool Bay, and managing this project in line with their expectations for how that field will operate. And then we have the onshore element of the project called HyNet, which has been in existence for a while, and you probably recognize that it has a significant activity in looking at hydrogen production. and then how that hydrogen can be fed into the gas grid. And of course, as part of a hydrogen production process, then we're splitting natural gas into hydrogen and CO2 and storing the CO2 offshore. And then we have a number of industries in that region also that are committed to decarbonising their industrial processes. And storage operators and various others. So that's all looks pretty sensible, and I'm sure you'll look forward to hearing more from them soon. And then in Scotland, we have the offshore infrastructure and the onshore again. So offshore is pretty straightforward, I suppose, and the onshore is has a number of points of interest. It has got an organisation called GB-Tron as part of that team, which is looking to develop a new LNG power plant in Scotland with associated CCS. And of course, SSE are part of that grouping as well, which is good to see, building on their past experience in CCS from Peterhead. And then as we move along the page, we have got the Northern Endurance Partnership, which is this joint storage site supporting both Teesside and Humberside. And the project's led by BP with Shell, Eni, Equinor, National Grid and Total all making major contributions financially and in terms of their expertise into that project. And then the store will operate to take emissions from Teesside and Humberside also. So in Teesside, we have BP operating the what used to be called a clean gas project, and it is a new power station with CCS attached to it. And then there are many other industries in that region who are engaged in looking at the pipeline development out to their industrial sites. And then moving across to the top right hand of the slide, then we have the Zero Carbon Humber Partnership. So the project is led by Equinor, and you've probably seen a lot of stuff around their plan to build the world's biggest hydrogen production facility. And then a lot of that project is also about a pipeline that is going to go from the Equinor Saltend site right through the major part of the Humber industrial complexes. So it goes right out as far as Drax Power Station and is an absolutely crucial piece of infrastructure for achieving decarbonisation of many large industries based in that region, including one of our largest emitters in the whole of the UK in Drax. So that is going to be a fantastic development for the UK. And in Humber, I wouldn't call them greedy, but we have another excellent project in Humber Zero, which is led by VPI and Phillips 66, and they are both jointly developing their project as well, which is looking at the decarbonisation of the refinery and a CHP plant. Then down at the bottom, we have South Wales. This project differs from the others in that South Wales does not have a local storage site. So they're looking in this project at shipping options. They're not the only project looking at shipping. So we've seen shipping being of interest in the Northwest, in Scotland, and also in the Northern Endurance Partnership. Obvious reason being that every region would like to take the CO2 from South Wales into their store ultimately. So shipping will be an interesting part of this project, and also the requirement to develop the port structure. So you'll see Milford Haven Port Authority listed in the project stakeholders and also associated British ports. And then we see some of the major emitting organisations in the region as part of the project. It's all led by Costain, and we have Shell there who are looking at some of the shipping elements of the project. And many other organisations, Valero, I point out particularly as making a really big contribution to this work. So every region pretty much has got a CCS related activity and a hydrogen production related activity as well. And that's it really as a summary. You'll see more about it in over the next few weeks. Just to give you an idea of how these things come together in a single project, many of you will have seen this HyNet Northwest example before, but it's a good one because it's a fairly simple depiction. So what we have is in the center of the picture, the hydrogen production facilities that will be built, and then the orange pipeline, which will take the CO2 from that production process out into Liverpool Bay for storage. And then we have hydrogen leading that production facility in the black, pipelines shown all over the place in this map. It'd be going for power generation, it might go into transport, it might go into the storage site. That's, there are good storage sites in this region especially. And it might go somewhere completely different, as yet to be decided off the page. And of course, another good thing about this picture is it recognises that a lot of this is around job retention, job creation and skills. And the team are looking at that very closely, in addition to thinking about the infrastructure, which is really good to see. So that's just an example. You will be seeing many more. So I was just going to show you one more slide and then a video. So the final slide I'm going to show is just how much things have changed over the last 18 months, and all in a really positive direction. So we started out with the IDC being launched in July 2019 and lining up very closely with the Bay's Industrial Clusters mission, with the goal of establishing the world's first net zero carbon cluster by 2040 and at least one low carbon cluster by 2030. That felt like a massive challenge at the time. And then what we've seen is a huge increase in the stated ambitions for this area. So in March 2020, we saw the budget announcement that we would be anticipating at least 2 sites being established, one in the 2020s, a second by 2030. But the important news that there would be a new CCUS infrastructure fund of at least £800 million. And then by the end of last year, we had the government's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, and saw, perhaps to our amazement and great delight, this real firm commitment now that we will have CCS in 2 industrial clusters by the mid-2020s and 4 of these sites by 2030, which is great to see. And so what I hope you can see is that having 5 clusters being developed through the industrial decarbonisation process sets the foundation for that being possible and even likely. So our projects are going to be doing feed studies, so the engineering design work, and then they are all aiming to get to the point of a final investment decision by the end of the project. And then we can see that funds are coming available to support initial projects. And then we've seen also the work developing on creation of business models and so on to support this work in the future. So what I would like to do is just close by saying, you know, I really feel it's been a great 18 months. Thanks for all the support that you've given to us in the IDC. We really, really appreciate it. And I hope you feel that, that there's a lot of really good stuff about to happen. I just want to finish by showing you one of the small videos we put together as part of the press releases for the deployment competition, which came out last month. I picked out a 1-minute video from Scotland for no particular reason. Perhaps it's just got the bounciest music, but all the videos are good, and we'll make sure you've got access to the links of them if you want to look at them later. So I'm going to let Clarice show the video just in case something goes wrong with my system. So if you could just do that, Clarice, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, I'll just try and do that now. Hopefully my computer doesn't go crazy again.
Thanks. So that's everything from me. If you do get a chance to watch all the videos one after the other, I think they honestly can make you almost cry, because it just is so powerful to just see all of these organizations coming together to deliver something so huge. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Bryony. That's very good. So questions in the chat, please, everyone. And I don't see any, so I've got lots of questions. So what do you think's missing at the moment? Because we've got some CO2 capture, we've got hydrogen, but if you look forward to 2050, Committee on Climate Change talks quite a lot about negative emissions, BECCS, maybe DACs, and I suppose also perhaps more industry, you know, direct industry than is appearing now, because we've got power, some with hydrogen. So do you see some of these missing elements coming forward now the clusters are thinking about it? I mean, they're not there in the projects necessarily.
I think there's quite a lot of industrial capture and fuel switching type stuff in the clusters already. And I think looking at the list of project partners, you can see some of those organisations, refineries, fertiliser production and so on coming forward. But obviously there will need to be more. I envisage that when this, you know, the sort of pipeline infrastructure and stores are in place, that it will be much easier for industry to really envisage how they will connect to that infrastructure. At the moment, it's probably a step too far. And, you know, we've seen, you know, Drax with their BECCS ambitions. I mean, they are not the only cluster that has got BECCS related projects in it, actually. So I think we'll see a number of those projects coming forward in the 2020s. at least to, detailed concept stage and so on. And I do feel, that we're reasonably on track with that. But, the detail, I don't really know much about what's happening beyond the IDC, because keeping track of all of this is probably as much as I can manage. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I suppose you're making a good point. So you think if the transport and storage is there, then things will follow?
Well, I sincerely hope so, since the idea is it being designed on a scale that will match what we need in the future rather than necessarily exactly what we need now.
I mean, do you want to say a little bit more about that? That's interesting. I mean, how is the scale being decided, do you think?
I don't know. I will just have to wait and see what comes forward. But I do believe that the projects are looking to the future in terms of what size pipes we need and so on. And they're certainly not planning for sort of, 2025 requirements. They are looking ahead to what's going to be needed in the region, and the details of that we'll have to wait and see what comes
Yeah, no,
forward.
that's very good. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's going to be exciting. Matthew, you've got a question if you want to ask it.
Hello. Yes. Hi, Bryony. It's a question. It's not an easy one, but it's we have five clusters. The UK government policy is to have 2 clusters by the mid-2020s, and I guess there's a risk, as we've seen before, that the teams that are not successful will be disbanded, and the work and the knowledge may be lost again. So I guess there's a challenge in sort of keeping the momentum or I guess at least the knowledge to develop these 5 clusters that we will need to get to net zero. So just wondering if you've been thinking about that at all.
Clearly, there's no good answer to this, is that I suppose my simple-minded answer is that the 10-point plan announcement was that there would be 2 of these clusters by the mid-2020s, with another 2 by the end of the decade. And that hasn't changed. And at the time that plan came out, the industry all bid into this competition on that basis. They knew that they were not all going to be live by the mid-2020s. So in fact, although the cluster sequencing is seen as being a step change, it can also be seen as fulfilling that commitment. And it has created, of course, a lot of issues in the clusters, but it does make real that commitment to have 4 by the end of the decade. And I also think that each of these clusters is a quite complicated entity with lots and lots of projects that could be brought forward to be the first, carbon capture onshore opportunity. And so the clusters are not just a single project competing with each other. They've got multiple projects in the region that are competing with each other as well. And it'd be really, I think it would be hard to think of them all feeling so disheartened they didn't want to carry on. I think they might want to slow down their rate of progress. But in terms of stopping, then I don't really see that, because so many industries have made public commitments to say this is the only way ahead for us. But I recognise that's perhaps wishful thinking on my part. But it is really the case that the cluster sequencing is in line with that announcement. It's just not quite what people had expected to see.
So I guess it's more, how do you keep another 2 clusters ticking from the mid-2020s to the end of the decade, basically?
Yes, it is. I mean, one of the good things that we have to fall back on is, of course, that cluster plans were always intended, to be 2030 plans, not 2020 plans. And so those will be there, because that's where the forward thinking, what do we need, thinking is coming from. And so I think there will still be entities in the region to keep the interests alive, but it wouldn't be the same as constructing 5 things all at once, obviously. But that was never the intention, because the cost of that is not bearable.
Yeah. Okay.
Gareth, you got a question?
Yeah, thanks, Bryony. It's really interesting. It's just intrigued. You mentioned the 10-point plan that was released at the back end of last year, which had an ambition of 10 million tonnes by 2030. The more recent, so March, Industrial Decarbonisation strategy mentions only 3 million tonnes. So I wondered if you had any insight on what the volume metrics were, and allied to that, I guess, what are the projects that are funded through the IDC aiming for collectively? I'm assuming, given that there are more clusters there than will come online, it would be a greater volume. So I guess it's a similar question to Matthew, but just in volumetric terms.
Yeah, I should have these facts at my fingertips, but sorry, I don't. We feel really what I would say is that the sort of cumulative commitments of the projects that we're funded, I think, would make it quite easy to meet those targets in government documents if they all go ahead. But exactly which number's going to win out, I don't know. It's just too.
Can I chip in on that? Because I'm reading that strategy. I thought that 3 million tonnes was from manufacturing industry. And obviously, there's a lot of other projects going on. That was my reading of it, anyway, Gareth.
Okay, I didn't.
Can I just ask, Gareth? Sorry, I should have asked Matthew as well. Where are you from? I was going to just ask the speakers to introduce themselves.
Yeah, University of Strathclyde.
Oh, right. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was it. If you read it, it is manufacturing, and as I was saying to Bryony, there's quite a lot of other stuff than manufacturing in there in the early projects. Power and hydrogen. Just then, well, I guess following on a little bit from this discussion, Bryony, when do you think mid-2020s is?
Yeah, I think it's 2025. I think it literally is mid-2020s because these projects, they can finish their feed study, get to FID in 2 years from now or less. And then just start construction. Yeah, I make it sound simple, but I think that sort of 2025, 2026 is in the plans of some of these projects already. Yes, and bearing in mind other places are going faster. Has anybody announced that they look to ship CO2 to Norway if that's ready earlier or anywhere else? I haven't seen that. It doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but I don't have any particular comment on that. Okay. No, I was just wondering because they're supposed to be ready at that little bit earlier. And generally, how much does importing CO2 into the UK figure in plans? Does that come up much? Because we ought to be cheaper than Norway, really. I remember telling True to Sunset once, just if this was before they did the Longship project, that actually they ought to fund a project in the UK because we've just got economies of scale. We've got a 24-inch pipeline or whatever going out from Humber side, add a few million tonnes from Norway, no problem at all. We wouldn't even notice it. We'd offer them a very good price. She didn't take me up on the offer, I have to say. Well, I think when you see the presentations from the storage projects in the course of this lecture series, you will see that there are aspirations in that area, which is really good to see. Yeah. Well, certainly the this economies of scale business, you ought to be able to win at it, without a doubt. Okay, and then we've seen industrial, but that Scottish video mentioned heating homes. how much are you seeing a spillover into other areas of life other than industrial decarbonisation? And is it? Do you work with? I'm not sure who it would be, but other sort of initiatives looking at smaller scale, non-industrial decarbonisation? Not directly, but our projects do. So if it's appropriate for their region, then they would have got strong links into the relevant bodies interested in that kind of work. I think we would certainly expect to see that sort of linkages being made through the cluster plans, because what we're already seeing is these clusters recognizing that they're not sitting there in isolation from everywhere else. And, you know, if they're going to produce hydrogen, it's going to have to go somewhere, and where's it going to go? And then other regions that would not likely have hydrogen production at scale in the short term, thinking, where am I going to get my hydrogen from? So there have been lots of discussions between the clusters and their kind of adjacent regions on how they might all work together on hydrogen for heating applications and transport and so on. But we don't, as a challenge, actively engage in that area. I mean, other than, you know, if anyone wants to know what we're doing, we tell them, but we don't really have very strong links on heating as such, because it's such a complicated area in itself, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's interesting how that one will eventually play out. I just saw an announcement there were the first 2 hydrogen, 100% hydrogen homes set up today. Should be interesting.
Wow.
Don't know if anybody's living in them, mind you. That's an interesting question. Very good. No, in the old days, if you had a hydrogen home, you know, and you had kids of a certain age, the first thing they do is try speaking like Mickey Mouse, wouldn't they, with the hydrogen, take a breath of hydrogen. Oh dear. Anyway, don't try this at home, children. No, sorry. Anyway, Lindsay's got a question. You want to ask a question, Lindsay, and introduce yourself if you don't mind?
Hello, everybody. Yes, Lindsay Armstrong. Hi, Bryony. Thanks for a great talk. Yeah, so Lindsay Armstrong, University of Southampton, academic lead for the Southampton Solent cluster, but obviously it hasn't been talked about as much in this because it wasn't part of the first call, so I couldn't go for the second one, obviously. But there has been quite a bit of work rolling around in setting up a roadmap independently with SGN and WSP, with the Green Investment Group. So we've got a roadmap moving forward now for the region, looking at hydrogen. But in terms of the sequencing document, obviously, that came out recently, shipping kind of played a lack of a presence in it, which sort of flagged up a bit of a worry for a number of the clusters, because particularly for sort of Southampton as well as South Wales, it's going to play an important role. So how important do you feel the role of shipping is in the roadmap moving forward, and what should we be doing to try to bring its presence more up in terms of getting it recognised?
I think the role of shipping is recognised already. I don't see anyone denying there's a role. I mean, we have to accept that cluster sequencing is about what should be done first, and shipping would not be the first thing you would do when you've got nowhere to ship to. It would be pretty pointless. But I know the stalls themselves see shipping, you know, as a risk mitigation area. And I think, you know, most of the clusters are mindful that shipping may be something that they either get shipped to or, you know, shipped from. So it is part of the deployment projects, not only of the cluster plans, to actually start to look at, you know, the port requirements and various other elements of their infrastructure to make shipping possible. But I don't think it's the first priority, but it is part of the planning, I would say, and perhaps more important than you might have seen in what's been publicly available. That would be my sense.
Just to ride on that, Bryony, how much about inland, you know, road, rail, barge, whatever? How much has that come up?
It's come up a bit. I think when you hear from South Wales in particular, you'll see that they are looking at various transport routes just to get things to the port in large measure. But, you know, it is looked at. And I think some of the other cluster plans will look at alternative transport options as well. I mean, they're not, you know, fundamental to the plans, but they are in there because I think it's recognised that particularly for the non-coastal industrial regions of the UK. Something's going to have to be moved somewhere.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I know Netherlands was talking a lot about barges, using them as sort of floating tanks. Just park a barge and skips almost for CO2. You fill it up, take it away, get a new one. It'll be interesting. Okay, I guess probably one last question, because we're getting up to the hour. Matthew, do you want to, since you asked another question and nobody else is asking questions, we'll let you get in again.
Okay, yeah, thank you, John. So yeah, Matthew Lucio, University of Edinburgh. Yeah, can you say anything about the £20 million research centre? What stage it's at? And yeah, I was off for a while, so I may have missed some of the. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you haven't missed anything in the way of an announcement that it's all live. It hasn't been announced yet, but I am expecting it will be announced in the not too distant future, but we don't have a date yet.
Okay. Progressing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much, Bryony. Is there anything that you wanted us to ask you that we haven't asked you?
No. I didn't have any expectations particularly, so that's all fine with me. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess what I would say. I'll ask you something anyway. I mean, what are you most pleased about, the things that's happened? I mean, what was your sort of biggest sort of pleasant surprise over this last year, would you say?
I think the fact that we've ended up with these 5 cluster regions all being funded through the programme and all planning to deliver really meaningful, big scale projects backed up by local understanding of what these projects are for. It wasn't my expectation at the start of the programme that this was going to be possible, and I suppose the other element of this is we've had the fabulous support from industry and everyone to make this possible, against a background of huge industrial uncertainty in the UK throughout the last year. It's made it particularly challenging for the people who've been writing proposals and delivering work to actually get through their company's processes and get approval and real backing to get involved in this program. But what we've seen is although people really worried about whether they would be able to secure the support of their boards and so on to get through in these difficult times, they have done. I think all the people involved in the program feel that they're backed up by their organisations, feeling a lot of confidence that this is seen as a really critical program for them to be involved in, which is great.
Yes. I mean, I suppose that's right. We're sort of taking the developments of the last year for granted, but to have that happen and then have everything work out so well is very, very good. Well, congratulations on pulling it together. It's certainly. If I was on your review committee, I'd say pretty well done.
Thank you very much.
No, but seriously,
really appreciate it. Thank you.
It's it really, as you say, once you've got the industry involvement, that's really that's all you can do, isn't it? It's just I suppose the only other thing that's got to come now is the business mechanisms have to deliver some real money. Yeah, because you've got promise of a few hundred million, but it's promise of a few billion, I guess. Is
quite, yes.
Oh well, that'll be good. We'll come back in a year or two and see where that one's got to. So thank you very much, Bryony. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. As usual, Karis, have you got anything to add?
So just to give everyone a quick update on what we've got coming up next week. So next week we've got the first of our clusters coming in, straight away next week. So we've got the Humber clusters giving us an update on their projects, and we've got and that's with Jonathan Oxley, who'll be speaking to us next week. So we're looking forward to hearing from him. Just to reiterate what John said, thank you, Brian, as well for joining us today. It's always great to see you and have you back on our series. So yeah, we look forward to what our next update from you will bring in a year's time, I guess.
Fabulous.
Yeah, thank you, and hope everyone gets to enjoy some nice weather over the next couple of days as well.
Yeah, not too much snow, I hope.
I
Okay.
hope not.
See you, everyone.
See you, everyone. Bye.
Thanks.